everybody. Donna Schwartz here from the Everything Saxophone Podcast. I'm thrilled to have David Bixler here. It is an incredible saxophonist. He's got his latest recording out featuring the poetry of Langston Hughes. This is an epic album. Okay, and the piece about Langston Hughes is epic. We're going to definitely be talking about that today. But what I want for all of us is to get to know David better. He's been on the scene for a very long time and incredible influences all over the place. So, David, welcome to the podcast.
Donna, thanks for having me. Great to meet you, and congratulations on your show. I wanted to ask you, I mean, there looked like there was a lot of episodes online. How long have you been doing this?
Oh, great question. I started off with Nick Manella. We got together and we're like, you know what? We need to do this podcast. And we started to do this in 2017, I'd say. And
Wow.
then he took a teaching position, so he didn't have the time. So then I took it over, and I've been doing it since that time. And, I love doing this show. I meet so many amazing people, and I love to do this long form, to be honest with you, because I think the conversations are awesome. I want my audience to feel like they're a fly on the wall. And, we're just talking and having a good time, and they're experiencing it and they're learning so much. And we've gotten a lot of great reviews from a lot of people, and not just people it's people of all skill levels, all ages, all skill levels, and many professionals, listen to the show too. And it's awesome. I love doing this. We had such a great time.
Very cool.
Cool. So let's get to know you better. So I know that you moved to New York 30 years ago, but I want to know where you're from and what got you started in music.
I grew up outside of Milwaukee in a city called Racine, Wisconsin. Number of musicians actually from there. Great saxophonist Joel Fromm, who actually moved to Connecticut when he was in high school, but we had the same teacher when we were kids. Fantastic trumpet player Russ Johnson, and then bassist Gerald Clayton, not Gerald Clayton, excuse me, Gerald Cannon. Have your editor mix that up. Bassist Gerald Cannon, who played with Elvin Jones and McCoy Tyner. So there was kind of a thing there, unbeknownst to us at the time, searching for this music. And I ended up going to Indiana University, and then upon graduation, moved to New York City in 1987. So that's kind of my story. How I got into saxophone is kind of a cool story. A little bit long. So, listener, you're in this for the long haul right now.
That's awesome.
My grandmother wanted a saxophone when she was a kid, and she grew up in southern Indiana during the Depression. And the story goes that my great grandmother thought that if she could get the down payment for a saxophone together, then they would be able to make the monthly payments on a saxophone. So they went to town, which was this tiny place called Vincent's, Indiana, I guess kind of north of Evansville, maybe. And they went from door to door selling corn, but they didn't come up with the money. So my grandmother never had a saxophone, but she vowed that one of her kids would, and that was my mother. And then so in fifth grade, I had already started playing piano. That was my first instrument. But fifth grade is when band started in public school in Wisconsin. And my choice was made for me because my parents didn't have to buy an instrument. There was a saxophone. So that's kind of how it started. And I've shared this before, but it was also kind of cool. When my grandmother passed, my wife was doing a festival, and she's a violinist in Mexico City, and we had gotten there. And day number 2, in the middle of the night, I got a call from my mother that my grandmother had passed. And so we turned around, flew to Chicago, drove 4 hours down to the bottom of Indiana, and in my grandmother's will, she had stipulated, or I don't know if it was in her will, but in her stipulation, she wanted me to play Amazing Grace at her funeral. And, even as we talk about it right now, I get a little emotional. I could hardly play, just thinking about, first of all, it was my grandmother, but then the whole story of, whatever, this is what I do. And it was basically because of her that happened. But
Oh my
So that's my
wow.
thing.
No, that's an
Yeah.
amazing story. So I have to ask though, all right, did she ever get the chance to play in her lifetime?
My mother, no, my grandmother, no. My mom did. Well, I always tell people if you've ever seen like old episodes of I Love Lucy, where Lucy grabs the saxophone, that's a little bit about what my mother sounded like without trying to be comedic.
I love Lucy. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah,
My mom
those are hilarious. Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. So then I'm just thinking out loud that, that probably was not the tonal concept that you wanted to follow. So,
No, no, it was not. But
so,
it was there. Yeah,
so you mentioned though, okay, so Joel Fram went to your same school district, so you had the same
yeah.
teachers. So you started on piano. Awesome. A lot of people tend to start on piano, but who were your earliest mentors that really inspired you?
Well, there's a saxophonist that, like taught at a music store in Racine, and this is the one that I and Joel from, and I don't know if you know Matt Olson, fine tenor player that teaches at Furman University. We all, studied with Kurt, and just yeah, I mean, he's still playing. I mean, I think he has Milwaukee Jazz Orchestra. They're just, that's how this music is. Everyone doing their thing wherever they are, well, however they can. You just make it happen. So like Kurt, and like the thing about him was, I mean, he instilled in me two things. One was the need to shed and to put the time in on the horn, which he was successful at getting me to do. And the other thing was he would just lend me LPs like every week, give me an LP to go home. You got to check this out. And so that's kind of how I really got into jazz, and like one of the ways is, and he expanded that by giving me different records to listen to.
So do you remember like one of the first records that really inspired you?
From him, I want to say maybe Dexter Gordon. It's a map. It's a double record. Was it Fried Bananas? Or there's one that's recorded live at the Vanguard with Woody Shaw. And
Okay.
then it's interesting because like Dexter was also the first like major cat that I saw live. He came to Milwaukee when I was 16 and my dad took me. My parents, they grew up when jazz was still part of American culture. That's when they went to college, where there would be jazz concerts at that school. And they had some jazz in their collection. I mean, they weren't like super jazz fans, but they were aware of it. Which is sadly not the case now. That someone that wasn't a musician or a serious jazz fan, would have a jazz record in the collection. So I'm grateful for that. But yeah, I saw Dexter and Johnny Griffin at Pabst Theater in Milwaukee, which was, kind of like the stake in the ground for me, like knowing this is what I wanted to do, even though I had no clue what they were doing.
Okay, okay. So that was definitely a pivotal moment. And I was
Right.
just thinking as we're talking too. So you had this amazing story about your grandmother, and then passed down to your mom, and then you. But I was just thinking to myself, gosh, what if you didn't want to go into music? I wonder. I mean, do you feel like you had the choice?
Um, I mean, not from any outside pressure. No. I
Okay.
mean, no one wanted me to, like in fact, my mom's talked to me, my parents are older, they're both still alive. And fortunately, brains intact and we can have good conversations. But my mom's told me, we just thought this was going to be like baseball or swimming lessons or something. It was going to just be a thing. And because my parents aren't musicians. I mean, they both, my mom played saxophone, my dad I think played trumpet and band and studied piano. But well, it was also a time where like in their generation, like there's probably a piano in a lot of homes, which isn't really the case now. So
Yeah.
we've come a long way as a country.
For sure, for sure. But
Yeah.
this is interesting though, because you really are, wow, you really are living out your grandmother's legacy. You know, when you think
Yeah,
about
I've never thought about that. Thanks for reflecting that on me. I mean, because tend to think about me, I guess, unfortunately, like right away. But yeah, of course, without her, this doesn't happen.
yeah, and but not only that too, such a strong desire for her. And as a woman, I can only imagine during those times it was not easy for a woman to play saxophone. So I'm thinking in my head, this is incredible that she had the drive and the gumption to be able
Yeah,
to try to do this during those times.
right. And the other thing I'm thinking about is like growing up on a farm, like convincing your farmer parents that a saxophone is something worthwhile, you know, even if they knew what one was. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, it's more of an interesting story than you think, but that is
Yeah.
very cool. So, all right, Dexter Gordon, like, big influence. Um, then, that probably inspired you to move on to music. You went to Indiana. And did you study with David Baker? David Baker was, I'm sure there.
David Baker and Rousseau. That was like, I had studied classical music. So like for the first couple of years, I was also studying classical. And then when I just switched to solely jazz. But then my last year I was there, I went to him and we were just working on the saxophone, which was great. I appreciate that time. People told me like if I would have tried that like 15 years earlier, I would have been shunned. But, he had become more mellow, I think, as he aged and, I garnered a lot of wisdom about saxophone playing from him. He was a bad cat. If you like that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. But you know what I'm also thinking too? All right, so you studied classical as well. I'm sure that that really helped your technique,
oh,
your
sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think everyone, everyone that's playing goes through something that makes them develop their technique like that, and a lot of that can be found in, the etudes or whatever, or, exercise books that, are used by classical musicians, without necessarily dealing with the sound or with the literature. There's obviously, saxophone's a saxophone, right? No two ways about that.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. And then okay, so then you graduated and did was it the and most people, do tend to move to New York, but you could have moved to other parts of the country. You could have moved to Chicago, right? Because there's a scene there too.
Yeah,
But what made you move?
right. That was kind of my plan. Like when I was like in high school and first in college, I used to hang out in Chicago a lot, and go hear music like at the Jazz Showcase. This is like I grew up like an hour 15 north of Chicago. And that was kind of like where I first thought I would end up. But then like I made a trip to New York, and then when I was in college, I would come out all the time, like on breaks. And the scene is, and it was like there were a lot more clubs then, and it was, to me, it was just mind blowing. You'd go to Bradley's. I don't know if you ever hung out there when it closed. It was a piano joint that always had, duos. Sometimes they had trios, but everyone would come there after their gig. And I remember looking around and like it was like my record collection was alive at that bar, and so, I figured I wanted to learn this music, and I figured this is where I had to go. And that was kind of my attitude when like I came to New York. It wasn't like, okay, I'm going to establish myself. It was, I need to learn how to play this music, and this is how I'm going to do this. Also, at this time, the NEA, which still had funding for jazz, so I guess they still do. They have the NEA Jazz Masters thing, which is great. But they had this thing called, like, I think, the apprenticeship program, and you could get money to study, and like they pay some living expenses. And so I got a couple grants to come out to study with George Coleman, which was also mind and ear opening. Like he played with everyone, phenomenal. Like for him, all keys are equal. Any tune, any key, any tempo, and it was intimidating, but it was great. And I just the authenticity of like being next to you know this cat that played in Miles's group, with Herbie, Ron, and Tony, obviously before, I guess people would say, but classic quintet when I were two with Wayne. They finally got to their thing, but uh, he's killing. And he's very generous with his time and his knowledge. And that was cool. So I think that was kind of, pivotal. And I mean, New York's so cool. Like for someone that grew up in Wisconsin, and it's just like, this place is nuts. I want to be here. So
How Well, I guess the thing is on spring breaks and other types of breaks, just traveling to New York, I think that sets you up to be able to be prepared for it. People don't understand. I'm originally from Long Island, so I get it with New York. People don't understand New York is its own thing,
yeah,
and
yeah,
you've got to be street smart,
yeah,
when you go there because you can't be naive and live in New York.
yeah,
You just can't.
right.
So
No,
I think taking those breaks and going there prepared you to handle that.
yeah. I remember uh one time being at, I don't know if the Blue Note still has like the late night jam session that goes from like 12 to 4 or something. But I remember like being in college and going up there, and Ted Curson was running the session. And you sign up and you wait for 2 hours to play your one tune. And so I got up there finally, and he asked me what tune I wanted to play. And I don't know, whatever it was, some standard that I was very comfortable with, and I played a fine collegiate solo. And then the next tune they called, I didn't know, so I tried to exit the bandstand, and he blocked me. And it was kind of like, you want to be up here, this is what you got to do. So they played a ballad, and I had to just figure it out, right? And I remember walking off the bandstand and the piano player didn't even look up, said, "Nice try." So that's like a New York thing. So it's all good. I mean, that's why the level's so high here, man. Because people, they just deal. Uh, I mean, I went out 3 nights in a row last night to hear, or last week to hear music, and heard like back to back. I heard Rico Jones. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No.
Uh, Phenomenal young tenor player, Joe Magnarelli, great trumpet player, and then phenomenal clarinetist, Anat Cohen. And it's just like, and then in the rhythm sections, there was, in those three bands, there was one rhythm section player I knew. I mean, the amount of talent is just so deep here. Like, and I've been here a long time, and there was three rhythm sections I never heard of before, except for one cat.
Yeah. So, I'm curious, what advice could you give our listeners in terms of a lot of people, do want to go to jams, but they get intimidated, especially jams that are such high level in New York.
Yeah.
How do you, there's a couple of questions in this actually. So let's say someone has some chops, they're good, and, they go to these jams, but like the mental aspect of it and dealing with this, like what kind of advice would you give somebody?
Well, I guess the first thing is to lose any notion that you're going to impress anyone. Because it's all been heard before. You got to just like, try to be who you are, and that's a hard thing. Like like if the person before you is just killing, you can't try to play that solo. You got to play who are you? What is your song? What are you going to play? And it's interesting you say that because my pandemic project was traditional Irish flute, right? And so it's kind of like, and I got like a really good Irish flute now. This is my third flute. And in fact, last night I went to a session, and my musicianship exceeds my ability in Irish music. And so that's maybe a blessing and a curse, because I'm frustrated because I know what it's supposed to be like, but I don't understand the music enough to make that happen. But the woman that was leading the session, a good fiddle player, started with a tune that I had been practicing that day. It was a little quicker than I had been doing it, and I just like blew chunks on it. It was the first tune of the session, and I had just like 5 hours earlier in the day, I'd been shedding this thing. And that's kind of, and I remember like that being as a jazz musician, like okay, like you got Donna Lee. in the shed. But then when you get on the bandstand, it's like, wait, have I ever played this tune before? And it's like slowly like chipping away at it. Now, the thing is, like when you're 23, that's devastating and killing you. At my age now, like, I mean, I really like doofed on like several things last night, but it's, you know, I guess, I mean, I care. I want it to be great, but I understand because I've done this before, like 30 years ago. I did the same thing in jazz. So I know that it's a good thing at the end. And, but like in the minute, I mean, I've seen kids like, just be crushed, like when they come down. And it's not, just because they didn't do what they wanted to do or what they could do. But, that's the thing about being in New York, you're starting over, like you're learning all over again and then trying to take it to the next level.
So, in essence, what you're saying, be humble, but have the mind. I say this a lot to my students. Have that childlike curiosity to learn from it. And it's not, what you had said, don't lose the notion to impress people, because it's not about that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
here's the thing though. It really shouldn't be about that. Yet, isn't it fair to say though that some jams, that's the impression? It's um sometimes people do try to, knock people down or whatever, or people go
Sure.
in with that kind of notion. So I could see where people, have this trepidation and fear, but I guess the bigger picture is that it shouldn't be about that, because shouldn't it just be about the music?
Amen. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Because I'm just thinking, of all the people that I speak to, and even myself, it's like you go in, it's like, okay, I got to show off, but it really, that puts your head in such a different place than where it needs to be.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm always thinking about, okay, what is supposed to come next? Like the minute I think about wouldn't this be cool to do? Or the worst is if I've been working on something and I try to like cram that in to what I'm playing, and I don't know why I do it after all these years, because I know every time I do it, it's going to be sad. And just kind of like waiting for this thing to happen, to like discover it. Maybe it sounds esoteric, but that's when I'm most happy playing music, when I'm just, okay, this is a conversation, like with, friends, with colleagues, and what's funny is, like I tell like my students when they're playing, like if you are going into a session and you've been I don't know, you've been shedding Charlie Parker, but the piano player has been shedding Robert Glasper, and the drummer's been, I don't know, shedding like Indian tabla or something. Like this is what we're gonna play, and that's not like really music making. That's like hanging out with your friends and you have a script. Like, okay, where now it's your turn to tell a joke. Now we all laugh. Now you say we're going to go for a pizza. And yeah, I mean, that's just not, and, the more you can think of it, it's just kind of natural. I think that's the best it's going to be. And, I think the other thing is that I've realized is, I mean, there's so many great players. There's, past, present, and, obviously more to come. They're really, jazz continues without anyone. Like if today was the last day I played the saxophone, maybe a couple people would say, "Man, what happened to Bixler?" But like nothing's gonna happen, right? Like it goes. But we have to figure out a way, like why we do this and what we can contribute. And I think that's what's important. And I think the sooner you can get to that, um, the better off you're going to be psychologically. I mean, because music hard enough as it is without putting this kind of crazy pressure that, that you're going to impress someone. I mean, that's wasted energy, in my opinion.
I totally agree. And, I love the way that you're saying this right now. And there's a higher purpose to it. I guess the thing though, a lot of times people will get advice to okay, or they'll go to jam sessions to try to shed something. Like they're working on an idea. They try to the purpose to go to the jam is to shed an idea, to get it out there,
Right.
get it out there. And I can understand that, there can be some value in that because you want to do it in a live kind of situation. But
Sure. Yeah.
but the hard thing though with that too, I mean, there's great for that, but also the hard thing for that as well though is that you're not totally present. Like I explain this as left brain, right brain. So if you're like thinking about this whole left brain stuff going on, and again, I understand the value of it, but like I say to my students, like try to work that out at home and then like try to be right brained when you're performing as much as you can. It's not the easiest thing, I get it, but try to be right brained so that you could be in the moment because you don't know what the rhythm section is going to give you, you know?
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
what you want to
Yeah.
react to. I don't know. That's just my thought. I don't know what your thoughts are on that in terms of like, shedding a particular idea or something at these jam sessions.
Yeah, man, I think you shed and then you forget about it. I mean, that's my idea. Definitely, 30 years ago, I wasn't doing that. But I think that's the ideal now is like what's going to happen now as you listen to what the rhythm section is going to give you, because what you have been shedding might not be appropriate for
Right.
the moment, and if this is about the music, I mean, because I can't, I mean, maybe this seems corny, but it's about the music, and I think it has to be. And for like, the players that I love, it's about the music. It's not about them. And I again, going back to this thing about conversation, I think that's super important.
Yeah. One more thing about this too. What do you, I'm just thinking about like the listeners that are saying, well, you know what though? When I go to this jam session, the rhythm section players, they're doing all this crazy stuff and it's beyond me. And what do I do? And it puts them in a bind too.
Yeah, I think, again, going to the like relating it to the Irish thing that I'm doing, there's sessions at different levels. All right. There's ones where, it's not as high and like it's more comfortable to like kind of it's easier to kind of like step on it at these places. But there's some where there's higher level, and maybe you wait until you're ready for that. Maybe you observe what's going on so you can figure out what's happening, or maybe play like two tunes that you like totally can crush, and then leave it at that, rather than trying to like get into something that you don't really know, because that's going to be frustrating for everybody if you get up there and do that. And it's also like, I think New York might be a little kinder now, but jazz can be very vibey. And maybe, some people in a not nice way will let you know that your presence is not welcome there.
Well,
And maybe suss that out before you put yourself in that situation. Because it's not going to be cool anyhow, even if like you try to be adamant and say, oh, I'm going to do this because I know this is part of the pruning process. uh you know I don't know.
what's it's been a while since I left New York in 2014. So, you know, for a lot of people, they don't know where to find those jams that may not be at the highest level. What like advice do you give people for how to find those types of jams?
Well, the thing, I mean, I think you can go to, I mean, like Smalls, like I guess almost every night from midnight to 4 there's a session. I think the host band plays a set and then it's freedom. I'm never up that late downtown. So yeah, I haven't been in a long time. But I also see that they started afternoon jams.
Oh, wow.
Like maybe go check those out. I don't know how often they are, but if you check the calendar, there might be a lot of like new school or NYU students there. And they could be of high level, but that might be a place to like, yeah, maybe just go visit once and see like, do I know these tunes? And maybe if you don't know those tunes, go learn those tunes, and then like, do you think, just how do you think you would fare in that situation? And give it a shot. I mean, also, even after like all this me dissuading you from, or the one from doing this, like, I mean, sometimes you just have to throw yourself out there, because if you don't, like, if you're operating from fear, you're never going to grow. I mean, you gotta, you, it has to be okay to suck, because that's how you're going to get better, like from those experiences.
Yes, and I love the way you say that. Operate if you operate from fear, you're never going to grow. Um,
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's so true. That's so true. And a lot of I think people, younger people nowadays are told that. In our generation, we weren't. It was just like, don't make mistakes. It was the total
Yeah. Yeah.
opposite.
Yeah.
When it comes to that. So, thank you for that because this was I love some of the ways that you expressed this. That was really good. So, in terms for yourself, how did you come upon, you go to New York, you're checking out the scene, you're going to jams. So, what was like the next pivotal moment in your life for you in terms of your playing, in terms of your growth?
Well, I was, just going to sessions, hanging out at, Smoke was called Augie's, and they had like sessions basically every night. So I was hanging out a lot there. But I got the gig with Lionel Hampton, I think in '88. And so that would be the next thing. That was the first thing that took me to Europe in my life. And it was a eye-opening experience, especially, coming from, like a collegiate background to that background. And, I was playing lead alto. And I remember, my first gig where, about 50% of the information that you needed to know was on a piece of paper, and everything else had just been passed on, right?
Mm,
And, at that time, I don't read much music anymore. I mean, it's just not like I don't do gigs like that anymore.
got it.
But, I could read anything, maybe, I was a good sight reader. And, but I remember like people just saying, hey, when we do this, after he plays this, we're going to play this. And they play me something, then this went on all night. It was just chaos for me. And then I remember the morning after the first gig, we were waiting for the bus, and it was just me and the straw boss. And we were out there, and he came up to me and said, you haven't played much lead alto, have you? And I started to say, I had, like in my mind, I was like, yeah, I played plenty of lead alto, but then I thought, no, I haven't played lead alto in this context, So it was very humbling, and just a different vibe. I mean, it was like real jazz as opposed to collegiate jazz,
Wow.
which and I would encourage any young person, anytime you have a situation where you could do something like that, just being on the road, and even if it's not your favorite music, just there's so much to be learned, about just like rolling off a bus or a plane, like no food, like no time to warm up, kaboom, you got to play. And those are the things that like make you a professional.
Yeah, but wow, that's a really interesting distinction between being in the collegiate type of ensemble, everything's controlled, versus
Yeah,
the real world where it's not as well, depending on the band, of course, but it's some
yeah,
situations may not be as controlled and it's more, yeah, you've got sheet music, but it's also more free form. And
yeah.
I know for me, like, I'm a little bit of a control freak, so I know that kind of stuff freaks me out. So, so like, I'd be like you, I'd be like, what the fuck just went on?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh man.
So just being aware of that, I think is really good. And okay, that's really interesting. All right, so then the Lionel Hampton experience, right? Well, um changed your playing, changed your outlook, I would think, and opened
Yeah,
your
for sure. Yeah,
okay. And
yeah.
what did that lead to then for you, like, next steps in your journey, in your musical journey too?
Well, it was strange because the band actually went on strike. Like the union was really pushing us. They wanted a union contract with the band. And, I was 24 at the time. And so we were at the airport ready to go to Japan. And, I just felt kind of forced. I mean, like, I'm all for unions, but, the musicians just got crushed by the Lionel Hampton's attorney, like the contract that they got was just not good. Yeah, like it's good for workers to be protected, obviously, but like musicians, they just don't seem to have the ability to fight against that kind of money. And anyhow, so it would have been my first time in Japan, and anyhow, came home. It was a drag. But I was convinced I had done the right thing by like not crossing that line. Uh, but when they finally resolved the contract, there was supposed to be like 2 weeks in Paris, but my first son was born at the time, and so I said I couldn't go, and that was basically me leaving the band at that point. And so, man, I kind of floundered for like, yeah, we were living a story. I have a tune called Lost in Queens, and I just kind of felt I was meandering around. Had a day gig at there's a music store, Wiener Music. I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember them.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
of course I do.
yeah,
Yeah.
like stuffing boxes with reeds and mouthpieces for mailing. And
Wow.
then
what years were those?
oh, that would have been like 89, 90 maybe.
Okay, okay. Was it when was I aware of them? I lived a couple of miles from Wiener Music. So,
Okay, crazy. Yeah,
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 yeah.
that's so funny. Wow. Okay. I don't remember when I was aware of Wiener Music because I was in New Hyde Park. So we had like Canalanos, but you also knew about Sam Ash. That's when we actually had music stores, right? Um,
Yeah, right, right, right.
I'm glad that Wiener Music is still or the Papas actually that they're online they're called Wiener Music but Papas in Mineola.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay,
Yeah,
crazy. All right. I mean, I just remember that they had the best prices for reeds at the time.
they still do.
They really did. Yeah. Okay, good to know. Yeah.
That's really so funny. Oh my gosh. So then
Uh,
you were floundering around for a little bit.
Yeah, and then my wife got a job in the Barcelona orchestra, so we moved to Spain for a couple of years.
Wow.
And I was teaching, doing some gigs there, but nothing really concrete. And we were itching to come back to New York, and we just after a couple of years we moved back to New York. And I just like just pursuing this thing, and doing whatever gig I could trying to get my doubles together. I don't double anymore, except for the Irish flute. I teach and then play the music that I want to play. I'm much happier this way. I mean, there's jazz players far better than I that play Broadway, but that's just first of all, I was never a great doubler, but my brain is just not. Uh, it's hard for me to just shut off, for that. I wasn't, a combination, I think, of like riding the struggle bus a little bit, like when I was doing some shows, and then just not digging it. Like obviously I like to get paid, but I'm much happier teaching. Um, and right. I make my catch line was like I traded my clarinet for faculty meetings.
Okay, got it. Yeah, well, the other thing too though with Broadway, I mean, at first it's amazing, but when you're playing the same book 8, 9 or 10 shows a week or whatever it is for years, it's
Yeah,
stifling. It's
yeah,
really hard.
yeah.
Some people, God bless them for doing that. And you've got to be on. Like if you're not on, you're
Yeah, oh,
out.
yeah, you're gone. Sure.
Yeah,
I
but
mean, the level's just like ridiculously high.
yeah.
But I mean, I guess the thing is, that's not how I think about music. And if I do want to tell you, you talked about my latest album being the Hughes project. That's actually 3 records ago,
Oh, sorry.
and yeah, no, it's all good. And then the last one, it's with my trio Incognito, and the record's called Incognito Ergo Sum. And there's a lot of little airs in there that are just there, that we did. I mean, they're like, like something that could easily have been grabbed from a different spot and pro tooled in. And some people would have done that. But for me, that's not live. That's not what this music's about. You know, like when Blue Mitchell cracks a note on something, I want to hear that. I don't want to like, hey, let's go back and make that cool. I mean, that's part of the earthiness of the music. That's part of the humanity. And I guess that's what it was for me. It just seemed like an underground factory gig.
Yeah, it's interesting, and just the short amount of time that we're talking, I definitely get the sense. And you know what? It's not even this. In listening to some of the music that I was exposed to before we spoke, like I get this feeling that you're the type of person you just want to be free with what you're doing. You want to play what you want to express what you're feeling, not be bogged down and tied down or whatever. And yeah, just be organic, I guess is the word.
Yeah, yeah, no, totally. You nailed it, and I'm glad that that was conveyed in the music. For sure.
Yeah, you
Appreciate
know
that.
what? This is one thing that I wanted to do too. So this is from the album that I was exposed to, and with Langston Hughes and Langston Hughes poems. And this is something that you said in answer to the purpose of this project. In your own words, you say, I chose Hughes's poems that particularly spoke to me about topics that I care about. In response, I wanted to express the concepts of these poems by someone who used words so well, by using pitch and rhythm and phrasing. I wanted to use musical elements the way Hughes used the English language to offer something as a protest or a commentary to the ongoing social tensions that occurred in the years during Hughes's life, the same ones that have been a painful reality in recent years as well as all the years in between. So after reading that quote, like what was the purpose? You mentioned in the quote, like about the you want to be expressive about what's going on now, for you as you're experiencing life right now. Just like Langston Hughes did with poetry, you want to do that through your music. So let's talk about that quote where you're reflecting what you're feeling, what's going on.
Right. So, this is something that I have wanted to do for, I don't know, 20 years. My
Wow.
mom is a retired English teacher. And when we first moved back to New York, we were kind of like scuffling. And she sent me a copy of Mother to Son, which is, a very iconic poem. It's brilliant. And, I put it on my refrigerator. And, it really meant a lot to me. And, I knew at that time I wanted to do something like with his music and I mean, sorry, with his poetry and like write music around it. Um, so I just lost my train of thought. But anyhow,
Okay.
like I said, like 4 out of the 8, there is a piece called Mother to Son, but I know what I'm going to say. If you go to the record, like if it's on Spotify, you'll hear the four cuts. I think it's Justice, Liars, End, and Moan. And then it's the Langston Hughes Project, Volume One. And if you, and the CD is the opposite because that's what I originally kind of that was the concept of it. And what happens there, and I don't know if you've heard that, but a friend of mine, brilliant electroacoustic composer, Eleni Lilios, I can speak. She took my pieces, and so like between Justice and Liars, like she put them in. I described this. I don't know her process, but she put them in her blender, and she came up with the soundscape and like between these two tunes and bridged them together. And then I blew over that solo saxophone, and then she like toyed with my sound on top of that. And so like the whole thing together, I don't know, it's 36 minutes when all four plus her soundscapes and they overlap. I mean, she just kind of laid this thing on top of the four pieces. And that's what I had originally envisioned for that. But individually the pieces like for Justice, for example, I mean, the thing is like I started writing this in 15, right? And so when it comes time for it to come out, like George Floyd has happened. And I'm thinking, well, great, like another white guy, like jumping like on Facebook, talking about racial inequality. I was a little reticent to do it, even though like I'd really started this thing beforehand. And, it's there was kind of like an aperture for all this to be heard at that time. But as long as human being, I mean, nothing's changed I'm convinced, in civilization except for the technology. People are always going to oppress others. There's always going to be greed. and people, like put down. So yeah, that's important to me. Like, in my neighborhood, man, there's just like just we walk around and there's just people like passed out, like on the sidewalk. And that's just such a drag. And we have there's this neighbor of ours that not in our building, but some guy that we met outside of a grocery store, like 5 years ago, that sitting around the food. So we bought groceries and we kind of, I mean, we're not friends with him, but we like know him and we buy groceries for him periodically when we see him. And then like there's one day when we like, I don't know, it was this month. And it was the first time that we actually had like kind of a lengthy discussion with this man. And he was saying, like, finally he was homeless. Like, he was living under the bridge underneath the West Side Highway down by where Fairway used to be. But he got put in an apartment. But because he doesn't have, I'm not laughing at you, I'm laughing at about what I'm about to tell you because it's so asinine. Um, he doesn't qualify for food assistance because he only has 7.5 years of like contributing Social Security, and he needs 10 years in order to qualify. And the people are telling him, well, if you could just work, 2.5 more years, then you could qualify. And he was like, if I could work, then I wouldn't need the assistance. And it's like he has no teeth, man. He can't get his teeth fixed. He doesn't have. Fortunately, he has a place to live, but he has a cane. He can hardly walk. And it's nuts that in this country, especially with what's going on with anyhow, we're all living in the same world, so we know this. But I mean, like the inequality between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots. Like, good. I'm glad you can make money, but then it gets to a point where, like, really, how much do you need, bro? I mean, and when there's like just tons. I mean, I don't have any answers really. I mean, I do, pat myself on the back for buying a cat groceries, maybe, but it's what I can do, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe there's more I can do.
No, well, the things that you can do, it's interesting. I follow motivational speakers like Mel Robbins, for example. And one thing I saw right before we started, doing this taping, she was saying, you don't want to be angry all the time. With the best thing that you can do if you feel like you're being angry all the time is to actually pour love into the people that you love. Pour love and pour love into what you're doing, and feel joy that way. Because if
Yeah.
you choose to feel anger all the time, it's going to bring you down, and it's not going to help anybody else. So
No, no, I'm not. I've heard like when you're hating, when you're, like you're pouring a cup of poison that you're forced to drink yourself, rather than who you think that it's going against. And, I think that's true.
and listen, it's easier said than done at times. It really is, and people have different perceptions of the reality going on right now. That's a whole other topic of conversation. But I think as musicians, though, we can express our realities. And just with the music that I've heard, like I feel like you're a very pensive type of player. You're a thoughtful type of player, where you're really, and let's talk about your approach to improvisation and also composition. But you're really thinking through, how do I want to word this? I don't want to mean this in a way where you're planning it out. I'm not saying that. It's just like you're really just you're thoughtful about what you're playing. That's what I'm trying to say. And I'm just curious, like, what is your improvisation process? Like when you're writing a tune and you're thinking about how you're going to express yourself. What goes on in your mind? What's your thought process?
I guess it's I think it is I'm thinking compositionally and really thinking that music is a combination of sound and silence, and that we have to play the silence, and also thinking about conversation. It's exhausting to be in conversation with someone where there's no downtime, where there's no time for you to respond. I mean, like we've all been there where, if someone is listening to you because been taught that's the polite thing, but you can kind of see in their eyes, they're just thinking about the next thing that they want to convince you of. And I don't enjoy that, and I don't want that in music. And I want to, I think, what's really kind of cool, like with the trio, it's often I mean, I really enjoy playing with these cats. And if I'm allowed, I'll make a plug. We have a CD release gig Thursday the 24th at Drum on Avenue A in New York City at 8:30 p.m. with Dan Loomis on bass and Fabio Rojas on percussion. But man, the thing about this is like it's kind of like we go for it every time. And whatever, we're not like changing the world, and New York Times isn't writing about us, but this is what we do. And I just love like playing with these cats and in this band. And but the cool thing is like not that a review makes any difference, but some people actually got that, and like I appreciate that that was conveyed in the music, because uh, it there's no words, like, it's hard to like put a metric on something exactly.
And let me, I'm just curious, how did you get together with the trio? How did that transpire?
It was during COVID,
Oh, okay.
I don't know, maybe like 6 weeks, I was still playing, in the house. And then I ran into uh Ugana Kegwo, great bass player. He actually plays in my quintet. He'll be at Smalls in October. And I think he was riding his bike, and I was in the park. He said, "Hey, I'm playing a session in Riverside Park, at 108th and Promenade." And so I went and showed up. And at first I was like, "Wait, man, can we play just outside like this?" And it was cool. And then so like started getting together with people, and obviously there's no pianos in Riverside Park. There's no place to. I guess you could bring a battery powered amp and play guitar. But I ended up doing a lot of just bass and drum sessions. And then with Dan and Fabio, like we play like I was playing every Saturday in Central Park, which was super cool,
Hmm.
super fun. And it's funny because like people were just starved for this.
Yeah.
Just like during that time, like just people being human. Like I think they might have never listened to jazz in their life before, but they saw people in community. And, I think that's what, crave. I think people are drawn to that. And I think that's why jazz could get over because, I mean, there's probably only, I don't know, 3,000 people in the world that actually understand what a jazz musician does. Like that listener saying, nice use of the tritone sub. No, they don't, but they can hook onto humanity. And we noticed a lot of that. But anyhow, with Dan and Fabio, we were playing it. They both live in, well, Fabio lives in Queens, but we were meeting in Prospect Park, quite frequently. And actually recorded the first album, Inside the Grief, with a different bassist. And then he couldn't do gig after gig after gig. So then Dan could do the gigs, and then we did this, and we went out. We actually had one of the Jazz Road grants 2 years ago. We went to like Montana and where else we go? Oklahoma and Texas, I think. Um, and but the year before that is when we recorded the album, and we had been on tour in the Midwest, and we recorded most of the album on that tour. And it's raw, and it's funny because there was one review from the Netherlands that came in last week, and positive review, cool, cool, cool. But the last last line was, but to be sure, this album is not for beginners. And I thought, yes, I've succeeded. Yeah, I really dug that. I thought that was great. So anyhow, that's how the thing started. And the thing about this also is like when I came to New York, I wanted to play bebop. And when I was writing tune, the first thing was when like I was writing tune, I had a quintet. We would do some gigs, around. There was a club called Mondo Perso. I think we had one hit at Birdland that wasn't well attended enough to bring us back. And they're just like different 55 bar, whatever. And but like the tunes, and it's actually someone pointed it out to me, like the music you're writing is not bebop, you know. And I so and one thing, you know, for like students that might be listening, that I tell my students also, you know, like, and David Baker used to tell us, man, why do you want to play like Bird? What do you think you're going to improve it, right? But it becomes obviously said facetiously, but it becomes kind of like a tool for you to be able to get at what you're trying to express, right? You know, like if you can deal with the intricacies of playing those tempos, like billions of eighth notes, all keys, you know, whatever, you know, you're going to be able to have substance to like whatever you're hearing, right? And so I still think it's valuable, like to study this music. And then, you know, there's a ton of cats that's what they do, like in 2025, you know, they play like that. Great musicians. And but you know, like to me, it's kind of been done before. You know, I'd rather hear like someone step in it, you know, a little bit. But you know, that's not everyone's thing, you know. And that's also kind of the brilliance of this music. I mean, it's so, I mean, to me, it's such a wide chunk of real estate. You know, some people would define it very narrowly. You know, if it's not swing based, if it's not like dealing with these tunes, these harmonies, this phrasing, it's not jazz, but you know what, to each their own. But anyhow, at that point, you know, I started like I'm just going like a little more experimental in what I was trying to do. And so this group is really kind of outlet for to the trio and like a little more the stuff that doesn't like fit into my other projects, which I have like four basic ones. One is the quintet, um, which is a little more straight ahead. And then I have, you know, I talked about the Irish music, and I have a project with my wife on violin. So she went to Juilliard, classically trained violinist. She started playing Irish music about 20 years ago. And we have a project with Arturo Farrell, uh, phenomenal pianist, where we do kind of Irish versions, I mean, Irish tunes with you know, kind of Latin rhythms.
Mhm.
And we did a residency at the Irish Arts Center with his big band in February, which was just great, just so much fun. Because I had started the project before I knew anything about Irish music, just to kind of do it. And it was a little bit arrogant in a way, because you know I just kind of wrote this music without knowing anything. But I spent 4 months in Ireland in 23 just studying flute, and you know really getting it handed to me. You know, just complete beginner. And but the music scene is so rich there. So anyhow, I feel that this music's a lot more informed, and we had so much fun. You know, I'm hoping that we can do this some more. Um, and then so the trio, and then I have a quartet. So I explained that Hughes project was 3 records ago, and then the one in between Incognito Ergo Sum was called Beatitude. And then that's my second group with a quartet with John Coward on piano, Ike Sturm on bass, and Ruggiero Boccato on percussion. We've done a couple of records, and that's all music written based on the Beatitudes from Sermon on the Mount. You know, going back to that justice thing. Um, so we did a couple of gigs. John lives in Nashville now, so um, it has to be worth his while to do a gig. But we did a festival in April. We played at the Bop Stop in Cleveland like 2 days, and it was great to see these guys and make music with them. You know, they're all like just like different friends to have conversations with, where you're gonna just
Mm.
show a different part of your personality, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Yeah. You know, this is interesting because there are people that have the belief that jazz is only bebop or swing music. But it no, it really isn't that. And you know, one of the first questions you asked me is how long have I been doing this podcast? And since 2017. And the beauty of this is all the music, the different styles or interpretations of what jazz is all over the world, because I've had people from Australia, all over Europe, US, you know, that kind of thing. And it's interesting what you said before with, yeah, you should study Charlie Parker, Coltrane. You should study the masters, but not be them because, well, they happened already. You got to be
Yeah.
yourself.
Right.
And what quote unquote yourself is, this is for everybody, is a mix of all your heroes, all the people that you listen to, and your personality. And that, I guess the beauty of jazz really is that it doesn't have to just be bebop. It doesn't have to be, this particular style. It can be your studies, but it's improvisation, because conversation is improvisation. We're improvising right now. I don't have a script. I never I never
Exactly.
I never have questions for my guests, because
Yeah.
like I said at the very beginning, I want this to be a conversation. And improvisation is the highest form of music making, and it's a conversation. And wherever that conversation may happen at that moment, whatever's going on in the world, or whatever's going on in that moment, let's say, and you're bringing your experience to the situation, other people are bringing their experiences, and you're coming together to tell a different or a newer story, I guess, so to speak. And
Mhm.
that's the thing that I've come to realize too, because I had that belief too, that, oh well, jazz, it's got to be this or whatever. No, some of the most amazing music, you know some people would say it defies categorization, but hey, Tower Records doesn't really exist anymore. I used to work at Tower Records in Carl Place. It was
Oh, for real.
awesome. Oh
Okay.
man, that was so great. But you, jazz really does defy categorization. I think that music that is improvised can be called jazz. You do want to study the masters. You want to understand where it came from. But you when you have improvised music, you could kind of, I'm going to make the argument that that can be jazz, because jazz is improvised music. Now cultures, here's the thing though, cultures, certain cultural music like the Irish music, right? There's improvisation in that. Would we call that jazz, or would we call that Irish music? That's the thing, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like traditional Irish music is that, but the thing I think that drew me to that is, that I see the Irish music as music that's born out of oppression. I mean, the Irish obviously were just under the boot of the English,
Yeah.
and in the same way that jazz, this beautiful thing, came out of this awful thing. I think there's parallels between the Irish music and jazz music. I find it very earthy, very soulful. Um, not bluesy really, but I mean, there's a modality that is just kind of like gnarly, that I love about the music. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's based on the history and what people went through, and
yeah,
there's other
yeah,
cultures saying, again, the same thing. But the word conversations, though, just right from the get-go when we first started talking,
yeah,
so you're really, I think, the way you're approaching music, for you, it's all about what conversation can I have right now.
yeah.
That's what I see.
No, for sure. Yeah, that's true. And I think for another thing for like an aspiring student is to know, I mean, there's things that I wish I was doing professionally that I'm not, and, may never not. But to, I can't waste any time thinking that what I'm doing is not valid because I'm not at the Vanguard this week. So, right after we leave, I'm going to go and just play tunes with an old friend of mine, Will Boulware, great keyboard player who played with Maceo, and his this killing record, I think, with the Brecker Brothers from the late '70s that he did.
Mm.
But just to me, it's just about playing the music, like getting up. I'm grateful. Again, I don't want to, it's afraid to sound and maybe trite and corny, but I'm grateful every time that I get to enter that space, and it really doesn't matter where it is. I mean, it's nice when getting paid a fair amount lines up with the quality of the music, but that doesn't always happen. And I think knowing that you're going to be a lot happier and a lot more content with what you're doing. And I mean, I think for most of us too, you have to do something to allow those things to happen. Whether it be a day gig or a Broadway show. In my case, like having a university position, that enables you to pursue this music um, the music that you want to play. And I think that's important to find that you make space to do that. I mean, some people just want to be a working musician, and that's cool. If like your goal, like you're not a jazz player and your goal is to become Broadway. I mean, it takes a lot of skill. Like, if you're a woodwind player, to be able to play oboe and all the doubles at that level, to get the gig. And if that's your goal, that's totally cool. Um, but back to what I was saying before, I just for me there's creativity in that, which is what the that was that's what I'm in pursuit of.
Yeah, in pursuit of creativity. And, my thought is also going off of something you said a couple of moments ago. What really defines valid? In the sense that, are you a valid, are you a real jazz musician just because you played Birdland? Played at Birdland or played the Blue Note? It's not that, I think it's just, do you have the ability to be creative and to express what you want to say through music?
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me ask you. I've been reading your bio. You're very busy as a musician, also. Like, How do you think about this when you go play? I mean, like, what are you striving for?
No, it's a great question. So, the types of music that I do with the certain bands that I play with, it's going to be more old style type of R&B, blues, 50s, 60s rock, sax. So, I want to be authentic to that style. For me, I can't be throwing in crazy things because that's number one, not authentic to that time. Can that be restricting? Yeah. And it's also a little tough, to be honest with you, because it's not like, you're the Broadway musician that has to play the same book all the time, but you have to play authentically to that style every single time. And you may be working on other types of things, but you have to separate that out. You have to keep it
Yeah,
real to what you're doing. And I think, like for me, finding opportunities, like I love working with singer-songwriters, I've done some of that. And that's really cool because they have, they have lyrics that they're expressing, but it's different grooves, it's different things that's going on. I just like to feel what the music is telling me and then go from there. That's what I like to do. But I think that my eyes have been opened up by all the guests that I've had in terms of what their definitions of jazz are. Like I think of Alex Hahn out here in Los Angeles. He's a great player. He's got a whole bunch of albums out. And he had I'm so horrible with names. I gotta say that, but names of albums and everything. And he had like a series of like colors, like songs all about colors. And it was just so interesting. It was so cool and it was so interesting. And would you define it as bebop? No. Would you define it as swing? No. But it was incredibly interesting to hear that. And then I had Alexander Betts from across the pond, in Europe. And the album that was featured was it was like a recreation of like the soul artists, like the big fat sounds, the big fat tenor sounds. And man, I love that,
uh,
you know? And I
yeah.
thought that was really cool. And he was playing authentically to the styles of those tenor players. That's what I love. Like I love the Stanley Turrentine. I love the, Gene Ammons. I love the Dexter Gordon. I love like that kind of era. I really do. But it's been done already. But what you can do, this is my opinion, you can take what you love and then bring yourself into that. And the way you bring yourself into that, what I teach my students is you've got to really get to know, you got to get to know your horn, you got to get to know the music on a deeper level. And, it's not a question of just regurgitating licks. It's about, getting competent enough on your instrument so you could say what you want to say, you know?
Learning the language.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, listen, David, this was really awesome. So, people want to find you online. Where can they find you?
DavidBixler.com is my website, and then X, Facebook, and Instagram. I'm Bixlix, Bixxlix. Um,
That's cool.
yeah, and then yeah, and it's funny because I at first my publishing company was Bixlix. Like I'm Bix and I play Licks, and But I went for AOL for my first email address. I thought, oh, this would be great. I'll be bixlex at AOL.com. Someone had that email.
Oh,
Why? So I had to put an extra X at the end of each syllable. But and then like go through this process and maybe pay $50 to change my BMI registration on my account. But all good. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, please check out the music. And you know, all my music or a lot of it's available on Bandcamp.
that was going to ask next. Okay, Bandcamp. And I mean, you're also on Spotify, but you know, the thing is, I think what's more important for everybody to realize too, yes, you know, I love exposing people to, you know, people that they don't, you know, they maybe not have heard of before, or maybe have seen once or
Yeah.
whatever. I love doing that. And people will check you out on Spotify, YouTube, but do the artist some justice. And if they have like a Bandcamp account, you know, go there, you know, and check it out. If you really like the music, support the artist because it's very important. Spotify is awful unless you're Taylor Swift, you know.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't
Yeah. Yeah.
get anything from that. You know, you get
Right. No,
you'll
for
get
sure.
the quote unquote exposure, you know, but
Yeah.
it doesn't pay the rent.
Yeah. This is for sure. Yeah. 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 Well, thank you so much. This has been great getting to know you.
Thanks so much for being on, David. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. My pleasure. Take care.